This video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, the best online marketplace to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era. This is 6 months of Carrera GT ownership. I first told you about my Carrera GT back in like February or March, but I've had it a little longer than that, and it's officially been 6 months having a Porsche Carrera GT. I've driven it a lot. There have been some hiccups, some stuff has broken, and so I figured it was time for a 6-month update about how it's going. Okay, so 6 months with my Carrera GT. You remember when I announced this car, I was so excited, my dream car for years and years, and now I finally got one. So how has it been? I'm gonna talk about that, and then I'll get on to what broke. And a few things have broken. I'll cover that, but first I want to talk about the ownership experience of this car for 6 months after wanting it for so long. So let's start with mileage. I bought this car, it was just under 10,000 miles, and since then I have added 1,200 miles myself. The first owners in 18 years owning this car didn't even get to 10,000 miles, and I have driven it 1,200 miles in the first 6 months that I've had it. Now, this is actually a big deal because it devalues the car. These high-end exotic supercars, every mile you drive, the car loses value. And so there's some calculus, like, is it really worth it to drive the car today? It's kind of a shame, but that's the situation with these cars. Now, I knew that going in, so I intentionally looked for a Carrera GT that had higher miles. I figured if I bought one, the miles were already pretty high, then when I added more miles, it wouldn't lose as much value. I did the same thing with my Ford GT. I knew I'd want to drive that, so I found a high mileage one, and I've just kept driving it. The problem with Carrera GTs is it's very hard to find them with high miles. This car at 10,000 miles when I bought it is considered high mileage for a Carrera GT. A lot of them were parked by collectors who assumed they would someday rise in value, which of course they had, and so they've kept the miles off of them. It's easy to find a 2,000 mile Carrera GT, but a 20,000 mile car is hard. So this was the best I could do. I have certainly devalued it by driving it, but it's such an amazing experience. It's kind of worth it. So on that subject, let's talk about what it's like to drive, starting with the clutch. Now, I'm going to explain the clutch operation first for people who don't know. The way it works is you gotta let the clutch all the way off, and then the car rolls forward, and then you add gas, accelerator pedal. You do not find that midpoint where you push in the gas, pull out the clutch, and then release it. That's not how you drive this car. This clutch, that operation, has gotten an enormous amount of criticism over the years from people, and they are wrong. I have come to the conclusion I actually prefer driving this car with this clutch than a normal manual with a normal clutch. The benefit is this. In a regular manual, you have to find that bite point where the clutch and the accelerator match up so that you can start accelerating and let off the clutch. And every single car is different. And some clutches are springy and some are smooth and some it's at the top and some it's at the bottom. Every single car you drive is different. In this car, you don't find that bite point. You just let all the way off the clutch, the car rolls forward, and that's your signal to then apply the accelerator. This is a better system. If you think about it logically, that makes more sense than finding a bite point and every car is different. Just letting off and accelerate makes more sense. It's just that it's different. It's not how we learn to drive a manual, and so people whose experience with this car is usually limited to maybe one drive or one day, like some journalists or YouTubers, they get confused by it and it's difficult for them. But once you live with it, you discover it's actually a pretty easy system. And frankly, I wish other manual transmission cars operated like this. It's very easy when you get it down. Now, the drawback to this is you can't ever really let anyone drive this car because since we learned how to drive a manual transmission in the normal way, doing it this way is hard and the clutch has become tremendously expensive. Last I heard, a clutch replacement on this car is 40 grand just for the part from Porsche. not to mention actually getting in there and doing the job. So I'm not really handing over the keys to anybody, but I have figured it out, or at least that's what I think, and the clutch works well in my mind. Now, on to probably the biggest surprise so far of owning this car, which is nobody knows what it is. I've been driving this car around a lot. On the freeway, taking it to normal stuff, street parking it. Nobody notices it. Nobody looks at it. Nobody thinks it's special. I will drive the car sometimes for a whole day and not get a single person ask me about it, look at me, thumbs up, any of that. And in fact, I have noticed that people have watched my video and they come up to me on the street and say, "Congratulations on your Carrera. My dad has one of those." I'm like, I don't really correct them. But most people, I think, don't really, this car doesn't have the crazy styling of some of the hypercars and supercars that came later, the Koenigseggs, the Pagani's, the LaFerraris. It's relatively subtle. And I think to most people, this car is just a silver Porsche. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably like, nah, that can't be true. It's true. Driving this car around, I would feel 10 times more comfortable parking this randomly on a street spot somewhere than my Ford GT, which attracts way more attention. It's a much more iconic shape. It has stripes. This car blends in. It's like the hidden supercar. I find it so crazy. And that leads me to my next point, which is even though this car is hidden, it's an enormous amount of fun to drive. And it actually combines two of my very favorite things, which are flying under the radar a little bit and also having fun behind the wheel. And I think the coolest benefit of this car is it's tremendously fun, probably the greatest driver's car of all time, in my opinion. And yet you don't have to deal with the attention that would come if you were driving an Enzo or an XJ220 or a F40 or all of that stuff. You get all the fun and not necessarily all of the crazy focused on you attention. But let's talk about that fun. My God, this car is great to drive. The sound is absolutely fantastic. The clutch and the shifter action are better than in any car. I know when you get started, the clutch is difficult, but everyone agrees that once you're rolling, it's an amazing clutch. The shifter feels great. The mechanical chatter from the car, it is sublime to drive this car. I have a feeling when I drive this car that's very different from every other car I drive. I'm getting back near my house when I'm driving it, and I start getting sad. I think to myself, I gotta put it back now. I'm not gonna drive it again for a while. It's actual sadness starts to well up inside me. It is so amazing. Every downshift, every time you accelerate, the car is so good. Now, a lot of people come up to me at car events and they say, "Oh, is it scary?" Because they know about Paul Walker, they know about some of the other crashes, some of the other fatalities. The car has a rep, obviously. But the answer is no, it's not actually scary to drive. It's a pretty easy car to drive. I think it's kind of a sweetheart. Once you figure it out a little bit, it feels very planted, very stable, very controlled. And of course, I don't take it to 9/10 or 10/10 or maybe even 8/10. Like I try to be a little cautious with it, but it is a very easy car to drive. It's mid-engine, it's laid out well, it's very predictable, in my opinion, on the road. You know, one thing to keep in mind about that Paul Walker crash, which is very sad, but everybody knows that car was on old tires. Obviously, I have new updated tires, that's a factor, but also they were going like 93 miles an hour in a 35 zone, according to the police report. And as playing with fire. I mean, if you drive the car and treat it like it could kill you, but kind of, enjoy it, but don't go too crazy, it's actually a tremendously rewarding car to drive. And I truly believe it is the greatest driver's car of all time. And honestly, driving this car around for the last 6 months, I have had, for the first time in my Ford GT ownership experience, some disappointment in that car. It's not the same, it doesn't sound the same, it doesn't feel the same. That's an amazing car, and I'm gonna keep it because I can use it more. But it's not this car. And you can tell they are on totally different levels. This is just a much more purpose-built, severe, like ultimate driver's car with no concessions made vehicle. And it is just so incredibly rewarding to drive. A lot of people, they get their dream car after all these years and it's not quite what it was cracked up to be. The chase was more exciting than actually getting it. That's not the case for me. I love driving this car more than any car I've ever driven, which I knew. Now, a couple of other things about the ownership experience worth mentioning, then I'll move on to what has broken. Number one, music. I listen to music while I drive this car. It's considered to be sacrilege by most people because the exhaust note is so good, you should be listening to that, but I love music. And so I listen to it. Now, the drawback is the car has a CD player. It's located under the dashboard, sort of in the middle. And it's a single CD player, so I had to buy CDs in order to So I've reacquainted myself with Matchbox 20 and the Goo Goo Dolls while owning this car, because all my favorite new music, they don't even make CDs for it anymore. But I do listen to music while I'm driving it, and I do make full use of the Carrera GT CD player, and I'm probably the only Carrera GT owner who does that. Another interesting thing about owning this car, it is low. It is tremendously low. It scrapes everywhere. You got to take everything at a pretty severe angle in order for it not to scrape. Everybody I know who has owned these has told me the same thing. It's one of the lowest supercars. It's going to scrape basically everywhere it goes, and that's a drawback to owning it for sure. You got to plan stuff. There's certain stuff you can't attend with the car because driveway angles, and honestly, I'm even afraid to bring it to certain places if I don't know how the driveway angle will be. I'll even find myself going on Google Street View and saying, can I bring the Carrera GT to that? I don't know, the driveway angle doesn't look good. It's low, it's really low. I feel more comfortable driving this car and parking it somewhere random than I do like driving over some driveway, which is a shame. But I'm gonna get the lowness corrected, more on that in a minute when I talk about stuff that's broken and stuff that it needs. The last thing I wanna mention in terms of the ownership experience, something that is a little disappointing to me, but then I knew, I have to be more careful with this car than I want. It's so valuable that you can't not be thinking about the cost while you're driving it. Like, I can't bump into somebody. Somebody can't rear end me. Like, I have to be so careful always while driving the car. With my G-Wagon, if I want to parallel park, I just back up and hit the curb. Okay, that's it. And then hit the curb on the other side. That's how I park. There's so much tire slide, well, it doesn't matter. This car, you're not doing that. Every little motion and movement you have to be careful with. And so as amazing fun as this car is as a driver's car, it's difficult to really use it to its full potential because you're just always worried. I recently went on a drive with a buddy of mine who has a Boxster Spider. And I think he had more fun than I did because he's driving around in an $80,000 car, which is still a lot of money, but this is $1 million plus. I mean, you're just nervous. You can't throw it into gear and whip it around corners in the same way you can do in a Boxster Spider. You have to be more cautious. And so that's just a reality of owning this car, but it's a shame because it's such a great driver's car. I don't suspect it's going to be shooting down in value anytime soon to make it more drivable. I think this is going to be a stigma that's always going to go along with the car. So if you want to enjoy it guilt-free, you just have to make more money. So now let's discuss what has broken and what repairs I'm going to do and how I plan to fix it. So believe it or not, a headlight is out. It's an 18-year-old car. Headlights go out as cars get older. But it's kind of funny because if I drive it at night, which I don't really do, especially now the headlight is out, I'm driving along with one headlight in a Carrera GT. I look like a complete idiot, but a headlight is out in this car, so that broke. Also, the rear wing has started to malfunction. So if you don't know, this car has an active rear wing. There's a button inside the car you can push to manually raise the rear wing and lower it when you want to, or the car will do it automatically. When you hit 77 miles an hour, the rear wing goes up, and then it stays up until you get back to like traffic speeds, like 20 miles an hour basically. So that's the rear wing. Mine is broken. It still goes up. Sometimes it has trouble coming down. Eventually it comes down, but it has a problem and it's broken. So those are my two, issues with the car right now, and frankly, neither of them surprise me. This car has averaged only a few hundred miles a year since it was first, bought. And in the past, when I have bought cars that haven't been used for a while, this sort of thing would happen. When you buy super low mileage cars, people say, oh, the seals are gonna dry out and it's not gonna drive properly. I've never had that experience. I've bought low mileage cars, the seals, the engine have always worked, including in this car, but it's the little stuff that you would exercise a lot if you were driving the car normally that breaks when you start to use it. That stuff probably would have broken over time if someone had been using it more, but it sits, then you start using it, you get some of those breakages. It's just kind of what happens when this happened. And I figured there would be some stuff, and indeed there has been some stuff. Now the good news is these are minor things. The headlight, the rear wing, not a big deal, you would think, but they do require attention, and of course, they're worth replacing. The wing is a big one to me because I think the car looks a little weird when the wing is down, this like long back end. I've always felt it's not the most beautiful look, but with the wing up, it adds some visual height back there, and I think parking the car with the wing up is kind of crucial to make it look good. Not to flex necessarily, but to make it like look correct. And so right now I can't do that because the wing will start to sag when it's sitting in park since it's leaking that hydraulic fluid. So I gotta get that fixed, and it's just a part of the car, you gotta get fixed. Now, replacing the wing with factory parts, replacing all the hydraulics in the wing, factory parts at a dealership is a $30,000 service. Believe it or not. The headlight, I don't know. I don't even know what's wrong with it. I think it's just the bulb. It should be cheap, but you know, it's a Carrera GT. There's no such thing as cheap. So there's some pricey stuff, but again, some stuff is broken as expected. The good news is I was already planning for this. I was already accounting for this, and I've already scheduled the car to go off for work. So there's a shop that deals primarily with Carrera GTs on the East Coast called Rapassi Motorworks. And they do other Porsches, GT cars, that sort of thing, but Carrera GT is kind of their big specialty, and they're like the guy. Jimmy Rapassi, he owns the shop, he's like the guy for Carrera GTs. And so I bought the car from him, and I had always planned on sending it back after a few months of ownership because I knew some stuff was gonna break, which it did, and because I wanted to add new suspension and a hydraulic lift system for the car. Because it is so low, KW makes a lift system, and so you can actually install that. A lot of Carrera GT owners have, and there's a little button and then you can lift it up, and then you don't have to worry about scraping everywhere. And it really makes the car a lot more usable having that in. So my plan was always to send the car off to Connecticut to Rapassi Motorworks to get the lift system installed and new suspension put on the car, and now he will also address the headlight and the wing. We've already kind of got a plan for how to deal with those things. Now, one interesting thing about the wing, like I mentioned, it's a $30,000 solution at a dealership, but there is an electric conversion that you can do to the wing. So switch away from all the hydraulic stuff and convert to just electric stuff so the wing goes up and down, push for a button with no hydraulics. And that is what I'm gonna do. Unfortunately, it is cheaper than going the hydraulic route. It should be about $10,000 to replace all of that stuff, including labor. And the real benefit is I'll get to park with my wing up because you won't have the hydraulics. Even when you have the wing fixed in this car, you shouldn't be parking it with the wing up because there's a lot of pressure in the hydraulics and it will eventually over time cause a problem. But with the electric solution, it's better reliability and you can park with the wing up, not whatever, it doesn't matter. And so that's what I'm gonna do for this car. So a cheaper, more reliable solution, which I like. Aside from that stuff, this car has been just fine. 1,200 miles, not a whole lot, but it's a decent amount of driving, especially after it hasn't driven that much in a long time. That was like 2 years of mileage with previous owners, and now it's been done in 6 months, and it's been great. There have been no engine issues, no powertrain issues, and I've pushed the car pretty hard. I've done 2 or 3 mountain drives, really get up there at 6 a.m. and kind of go hard and have fun. The car's been great. Downshifts, upshifts, clutch feel, it's all been great. Always starts every time, no problems. So far, so good, aside from those little things and then suspension, which I'm already planning to replace. So that is the update. 6 months with a Carrera GT. I still can't believe it. And the driving experience has truly been every single thing that I hoped it would be. I love the car. I love to use it. I love everything about it. I only wish I didn't have to be so anxious about the value when I drive, but that's just kind of the reality of the situation. So there you go, that's my update. No regrets, by the way, on buying this car. I didn't mention this in my Carrera GT announcement video, but I considered buying a Ferrari F40 instead, but it was a little too much money for me. It was a little more than I could afford. And I also decided that it simply wouldn't be as usable as the Carrera GT, and that has turned out to be the right call. F40 would be cool, it's amazing to look at and have, but it's hot and tight and unreliable and difficult to own and work on, and I think it would have been more challenging to drive. This car has been a total peach so far. It's been wonderful to own, wonderful to operate, and I know I've driven it a lot more than I would have an F40. As cool as it would have been to have an F40. This was certainly the right call, and I love it. I love it. 6 months, and it's been amazing.